So, let's talk about a story that on the surface might seem like a simple bureaucratic issue, but it actually cracks open a massive question for a global power like India. It's all about the deportation of Francesca Orsini, a really celebrated academic who has spent her entire life studying India. And what happened to her tells us a lot about where the country might be heading.
So, what's at the heart of all this? Well, it's a really big question. What does it actually mean when a nation, one that wants to be a leader on the world stage, starts to turn away the very people who admire it most? You know, the people who have dedicated their lives to understanding its culture and sharing it with the world.
All right, first up, a scholar is deported. Let's dig into the specifics of the case that kicked off this whole conversation.
So who are we talking about? This is Francesca Orsini. And look, she's not just some casual visitor. We're talking about a professor emerita, basically a legend in the world of Hindi literature. Her work is absolutely fundamental to understanding India's literary history. The main thing to get here is her deep, lifelong connection to the country.
So, how on earth did we get to this point? I mean, after decades of celebrated work, things just took a bizarre turn. In late 2024, she's visiting India and is accused of doing some academic work while she's on a tourist visa. Then, boom, just a few months later, she's blacklisted. And when she tries to come back a year later, she's just turned away right at the airport. It's a pretty shocking series of events for a scholar of her stature.
Okay, Section 2, the official explanation. So what was the reason given for this, well, pretty drastic action? The official line was, well, it was short and to the point. Violation of visa conditions. Basically, she was on a tourist visa and the authorities said she was doing academic work. On the face of it, it's just a simple rule break.
But, this is where it gets a little more complicated. The official reason is one thing, a technicality, but the editorial we're looking at brings up a really sharp counterpoint. This rule seems to be enforced selectively. It points out that foreign business leaders come and go all the time, doing work, even making political statements, and they don't face anything like this. So that kind of suggests there might be something else going on under the surface.
And that brings us to our third section, India's two minds. Because this one case, it really pulls back the curtain on a much bigger, kind of contradictory thing happening in India's approach to the world right now.
The whole argument here is that India seems to be trying to have it both ways. It's sending out two completely different signals about what it wants from the rest of the world and what it fears.
And you can see that conflict laid out perfectly here. On one hand, India's got the welcome mat out for things like global technology, capital, and all the know-how. But on the other hand, it's building these fences to keep out what it sees as dangerous ideas. Things like so-called global conspiracies, the influence of certain NGOs, and, well, critical thinkers and scholars like Francesca Orsini.
So you might be asking, where does this defensiveness come from? Well, the editorial suggests it's tied to this idea that's gaining ground in some circles, a belief in a global conspiracy to influence Indian thought. And if you see things through that lens, foreign scholars start to look less like partners and more like potential agents of foreign influence.
This all boils down to a classic dilemma, right? One that every country has to grapple with. Section 4, openness versus security.
Let's just break down what we mean by that. An open society, that's a place that believes the free flow of people and ideas is actually what makes you strong and helps you grow. But a closed society, that's the opposite. It's built on the idea that you have to put up walls to keep yourself safe. The thing is, the editorial argues this defensive crouch often ends up backfiring.
And the risks of going down this closed path are huge. The argument is that it can literally stunt a nation's growth and stop it from reaching its full potential. But here's the real kicker. It doesn't even guarantee that you'll be any safer. So you could get all the downsides of being closed off without the one thing you were hoping for in the first place.
All right, so if that's the problem, what's the fix? Well, that's our final section, the path forward. The main solution proposed is actually pretty straightforward and practical. Stop using visa rules as a tool to shut people out. Instead, how about creating a system that actually welcomes the world's brightest minds? The scholars, the scientists, the experts who genuinely want to engage with and contribute to India.
And this leads us to a really powerful, kind of ironic point. Just think about it for a second. So many of the world's top leaders, in tech, in science, in politics, they're of Indian origin, and they're thriving in other countries, often because those countries have exactly the kind of open, welcoming policies that let brilliant people do their best work. It's a pretty stark reminder of what openness can achieve.
So we end up right back where we started, with this huge question that this whole case forces us to confront. A country might feel safer in the short term by building walls and shutting down ideas it doesn't like. But the real question, the one that's going to define its future, is this. Can a nation truly protect its interests, and can it truly become great by closing its mind?